How's it going? So in this video, I want to talk to you guys about how I took Dan Bilzerian's dating coaching offer from a 0.9 return on advertising spend to a 3.9 return on advertising spend in the first 30 days of working with him, implementing a few small, simple changes that you guys can take and implement yourself. My name is Sam Sauter. I run a digital marketing agency. We do 7 figures a year. We manage hundreds of thousands of dollars per month profitably in paid advertising spend. I've had the privilege now of working with some of the largest personal brands in the world, coaches, consultants, agencies, large financial service firms, even some funds managing multi-billion dollars of assets under management. I've ran paid ads for everything now at this point in career. So this was a really unique and kind of interesting case study on my resume. I want to share with you guys. There's a lot of kind of interesting, exciting things that you can take away and start implementing in your own business to help you grow. Without further ado, let's quickly go into that. First thing that I want to say is that in my entire career, I've worked with tons of celebrities behind the scenes. Some I'm on NDA, some I can talk about, some I can't. I've been pretty honestly disappointed throughout my career. A lot of them haven't been super kind behind the scenes. So I was a bit jaded and I was expecting not to like Dan personally, regardless of what you think of his politics, his personal life, whatever. He was incredibly kind to me, his staff. You know, I spent a bunch of time with him and stayed at his house, and personal chef, and met all of his friends, and the way he treats people behind the scenes is pretty cool. So regardless of whatever your thoughts are on him, it was a pretty cool experience, and I'm glad that things are going so well. So let's talk about, kind of go through quickly the data here. So you can see here, if you flash to my screen here, you can see just for the month of December, $110,000 in spend, losing money at a 0.96 return on advertising spend before the fixed costs of everything that was involved with the business. That was a net loss overall for the business. Now I want to flash forward here in the first $10,000 in spend that we have incurred for this month here. Let's quickly go through the stats because we track everything very diligently with every single one of our clients. Okay, so let me just quickly show you what this looks like. So on the first $10,000 of spend, we generated 749 leads, $12 cost per lead. 175 of those leads were qualified. We're going to talk about what a qualified lead meant here pretty soon. So only about 23% of the leads were qualified. There was about 70% of the marketing qualified leads were booked on the calendar. The cost per qualified lead was $52. We had 122 booked sales calls for a $75 cost per booked call. 55 of those calls were taken, and we had a 45% show up rate. We'll get into that in a second, but that's not a good metric right there. And then there were 45 offers made. An offer is made when the prospect was deemed qualified for the high ticket offering that we had in the business. And that left us with 45 offers were made. We closed 10 new clients, 22% close rate. Cost per offer made was $203. Our cost to acquire a new customer was $916. The way that this funnel was structured was that somebody would see the ad, they would elect how much money that they were making on that particular year. This was positioned as a very high ticket offering for seasoned executives and very successful men looking to get a better grasp on their dating life. People that were generating more than $100,000 per year in annual income were sent to a page where they could book a team with our sales call, where they would pitch an offer that was upwards of $4,000 to $20,000. People that were deemed making less than $100,000 or had filled that out on the form rather, were sent to another page where they could purchase an abbreviated version of the course for approximately $97. The manual cash collected, manual meaning what the sales team brought in, was $26,000 in new cash collected. The revenue was close to $40,000. The automated revenue from people that bought the low ticket offer was close to $8,100. So there's a total of $34,000 in cash collected. That's a 3.7x return on advertising spend. Total revenue at $48,000. And then the revenue return on advertising spend was 5.2. The average cash collected for this particular offer was $2,600. And then we also have another metric here, which is low ticket liquidation percentage. So typically in the digital marketing community, liquidating advertising spend means recouping, paying back some of your advertising spend. You know, in this context, for every dollar that we would spend in advertising, approximately 88 cents would come back immediately in the form of a buyer lead, people that would buy our lower ticket offering, and that was not including the high ticket buyers, which is very efficient because typically in these systems, you're booking a call with the sales team and you have to incur a loss, and you have that total exposure of those sales calls with the hope that you're going to make it back on that high ticket sales process. There was also an additional installments collected from the trailing months. We don't really like to count that. I basically look at specifically my cash return on advertising spend, and I assume that 0 paybacks and installments are going to come back into the business later. I don't scale on revenue ever, I scale on cash collected. So 3.7 is close to 4. It's pretty healthy. It's not incredible, but it's pretty healthy. So this is, going to scale pretty quickly. Now, when I'm typically scaling a company, the most important metric to me is return on advertising spend in terms of cash, especially if you're in a B2B setting. You don't always want to assume that people are going to pay back their installments in the trailing month. So I just assume that it's never going to come back. Although in this company, we have about a 75% average collection rate on our accounts receivable. So I think that when this all shakes out, it'll be about a 4.5x return on advertising spend just within the first 30 days of advertising. That doesn't include future purchases. We have a back end, we have recurring revenue, and so on and so forth. So very healthy metrics. This is a pretty wide spread. When I reference the spread when I'm scaling a paid advertising campaign, that is the distance between what our current return on advertising spend is and then where our break-even return on advertising spend is. So for instance, 1x 2x return on advertising spend, that actually is losing money in a lot of instances because it doesn't take into account the gross margin of the product in which you're selling. So it might be closer to a 1.6x, 1.7x with e-commerce and so on and so forth. So with our particular business, our break-even return on advertising spend was about 1.5, 1.6 to where the company would be healthy. So I was very happy with the 3.7x. There was a big distance there and a spread between 3.7x where we currently were and 1.7x where we would start to lose money if we drop below that. Now, typically what happens is as you start to scale the advertising spend, that spread starts to compress. Then you must then kind of work on conversion rate optimization, start trying to improve the messaging in the ads to get higher click-through rates, the close rates on that sales process so that we can widen the spread once again at that larger scale. And then we scale once further, the spread typically compresses, and then we have to keep going through that process over and over and over again. So being as that it was at a 3.7x trailing towards a 4.5x, I felt we actually scaled these campaigns, and I will keep you posted. In the prior month for this business, we did about $220,000 of cash collected. I will keep you posted on the scaling and the growth of that business as we continue. And then typically the last metric that I'm calculating is just the gross profit from our campaigns. Then we can take a look at our fixed expenses and know how we did for that month. But typically these info businesses, these education types of businesses are very capital light. They don't require a ton of capital to get started. So this was very, very positive in showing a lot of signs. That was the data that I've just showed you now after making these changes. I want to go through and tell you exactly what those changes were to make that big adjustment there. So the first change that I made was actually changing the model itself. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the paid advertising itself. Sometimes the business model, fundamentally, the unit economics just don't make sense. You had never had a chance of being successful from the first place. So when I came into the business, the company was utilizing this $497 price point. That was their entry point, their funnel as an entry point into the business. The problem with that is it kind of falls into this bucket in the info space that we kind of call mid-ticket price point. So mid-ticket, typically in the info and the online education space, that is typically a price point of around $300 or $400 to all the way upwards to $1,000 or $2,000. And those mid-ticket price points are kind of in this awkward point to where it's not so big of a purchase, north of $2,000, to where they need a salesperson to speak to the person, but it's not so small that it's an impulse purchase. The common way of selling to those people is typically through something called a presentation funnel. So something along the lines of a webinar is the most common thing in our industry, and they can be highly, highly profitable for the business owner. But in this particular instance, Dan, the celebrity behind this business, wasn't really necessarily going to get on camera every day. That wasn't something that was part of his lifestyle that he was going to do. And we didn't really have somebody that was accustomed to really running a successful webinar. So really our two options were to go super high ticket and focus on these buyers where we're maximizing the total amount of profit. And high ticket, you can typically get a return on advertising spend that ranges for anywhere from a 2x to a 3x in the first 30 days to even as high as an 8, 9, or 10x return on advertising spend in some unique instances. Low ticket, on the other hand, the purpose isn't to make money by itself. It's rather to create a buyer lead, to create leads and people and sales on your list. We have a client right now that's spending about $13,000 to $14,000 per day on a low ticket offering. The average order value on that low ticket offering is about $197. We break even. We have about a 1.2x return on advertising spend. So we just break even, but the benefit is the business owner is going to nurture those leads and the people that enter into that education community for years and continue to sell them and ascend them onto higher levels of packaging and coaching. I see a lot of people that are in our online education and info space, and they think that their low ticket offering in 2025 is going to be profitable from a standalone perspective. And that is just not the case. You know, we're 2025 now, ads are very expensive, conversion rates are a lot lower, it's very, very competitive. So you're no longer going to make money standalone on the low ticket itself. All the money is made by finding out a way to choreograph specifically an upsell that is going to have the person then ascend into higher levels of coaching. If you can get a low ticket to work, it's phenomenal because you're getting paid to get a lead that is arguably more engaged. If you can make low ticket work, it's very, very challenging to do that because it's easier to get a conversation with online marketing than it is to get a conversion of the purchase. This funnel for a low ticket has to be incredibly dialed in, perfected, look really nice, versus this high ticket funnel. You can kind of get something up and working and start speaking to your prospective customer rather quickly. You see people like Cole Gordon who've pioneered this high ticket model, and their funnels are not very attractive, not very nice. They're making millions and millions of dollars. So it doesn't take much to get this type of funnel up and running. This, on the other hand, is much more complicated and requires a much higher degree of marketing prowess. So when I came into the business, they were not really in one or two camp. They weren't clearly working on ascending their low ticket buyers into the upsell process, but they also didn't have a high ticket sales process on the front end that was working. They were kind of stuck in this mid ticket issue. And the issue with mid ticket is it's not high enough to where you're really going to be making money by yourself, unless you wanted to kind of start doing webinars or things like that. But it's also not low ticket enough that you're not really generating enough buyer leads. Even at spending $4,000 a day like the media buyer was, you're only getting about 5 to 8 customers per day. And only a small percentage percentage of those are going to be really interested in upselling? So what I told them and when I came into the business and was I said, we need to clearly delineate, high ticket or low ticket, not be stuck in this kind of messy middle. And what we did is we created a $97 version of the course, much a smaller, narrower problem in the dating niche. It was specifically a small fraction of the overall course. They gave people a bit of a sneak preview, but it didn't compete with and cannibalize the core high ticket offer that drove the highest majority of the revenue for the business. You saw our average order value was about $4,200 for this new type of funnel. With the mid-ticket offer, the problem was it was cannibalizing the high ticket offer. It was not clear why the prospect would benefit from going from a $400 purchase to a $4,000 purchase. Does that make sense? So if you're thinking about your low ticket offer, you want to clearly delineate a small specific problem, but not solve their entire problem and satiate all of their desires. And then you need to get really clear on how are we going to choreograph that upsell process and what is the reason they're going to send into that. A great way that you can do this is through an event. Okay, if you have a consulting offer and you sell the modules might compete with the consulting offer, but if you sell an event or if you sell, for instance, one very successful is you can sell a book on your low ticket funnel. Like with this specific dating offer, the thing that really worked well for us is saying this is just the strategy on, how Dan used text game effectively to improve his dating life. And that was a very small and clearly delineated problem that didn't compete with when the salesperson called them and said, hey, would you like to learn cold approach, social media, and kind of all these other kind of aspects that were important in improving that person's overall dating life. Not to mention the accountability and the group coaching calls and the calls with Dan that were kind of a higher ticket purchase of $4,000 to $6,000. Now, the one caveat that I want to mention is that if you are doing a high ticket model, the one challenge with the high ticket model is that you do have to scale sales talent. Okay, this can be a type of funnel here where it's very, very quickly to start making a profit easy, getting a 2, 4, 5, 6, 7x return on advertising spend. You can see we have case studies below in this video where you can get upwards of a 17x return on advertising spend in some select few instances. But the challenge with that is that you're going to get stuck bottlenecking by sales. Everybody who knows who's been an agency for a long period of time knows that generating leads for these type of high ticket offers, it's pretty easy. The problem always lies in helping the business owner to be supporting them in that sales process. Generating the lead is only 20% of the challenge. The other 80% is getting them to convert that lead. So that's where my team comes in and we spend a lot of time thinking about how we're doing lead nurture, middle of funnel, after they've initially had that opt-in and filled out that form. How are you strategically placing information in front of the prospect prior to them jumping on the sales call? So that when they show up to that sales call, they're not on the 20 or 30 yard line in the curiosity, just kind of browsing, but they're very serious and they're kind of on that 60, 70, 80 yard line. If you generally have very, very strong marketing, you don't need to be that great at sales because the person already shows up kind of ready to make that purchase versus if you have very, very weak marketing, that person's just showing up very curious and it can sometimes damage your brand, your reputation when you have to really hard pitch and hard sell them to move forward. So now that the model was improved, we had both a high ticket, we had both a low ticket that both had their proper entry points into the business and both had their place. The next thing that we changed was we had to change the ad account strategy. Okay. Primarily, the first thing that we did is we switched from ABO, ad set budget level optimization, to a campaign budget level optimization. We've talked about that in a lot of other videos here, but the key concept to understand is that in 2025, the Facebook algorithm and the Facebook advertising platform as a whole has just become so incredibly sophisticated. It is better than you, even the most sophisticated of media buyers, at predicting and determining the targeting and determining which avatar, which user on their platform is most probable to convert. When you're switching to that CBO campaign structure, you are then giving Facebook more creative to do what it deems is the appropriate thing, as opposed to choking it with that ABO structure and saying that this amount of budget has to be allocated to this particular ad or this particular creative. When we switched to an ABO, campaign budget optimization, and we switched also to broad targeting, it gave Facebook the freedom and the flexibility saying, here's all the assets, here's what I'm looking for in my ideal customer, and then it had total creative freedom. And typically if you're going to do that and switch your ad account, you're almost always going to see a drop in your cost per result, whether it's an e-commerce store and you're optimizing for cost per purchase, or it's a cost per lead for a service-based business. Now, it's not enough just to go broad targeting, expect that you're going to get your ICP, your ideal client profile, on the phone with you. There's a couple other small tweaks that you needed to make on the funnel here that helped us improve that paid advertising performance. So typically what I'm doing when I'm working with one of my clients is I ask them specifically, what is your criteria for an ideal lead? Commonly I was working, in the real estate industry, and one of my clients was doing about $2 million per year. And I said, what's your ideal lead? He said, well, I want to work with real estate agents. He's built his whole business. I said, if you could be more specific than that, what are the common traits of a real estate agent that make him, most effective for you? Because I know the real estate industry, and only about 40 to 50% of real estate agents even do it one deal a year. So we have to be more specific than that. And what we ultimately came down to is that typically as most successful clients were doing $100,000 per year in GCI, gross commission income, and they also had 5 active listings. Okay, so typically what you're going to want to do when you're advertising on the Facebook platform is you want want to ask yourself, what is your ICP? Insert those on a questionnaire, and then based on their responses, if they select that they are the right type of lead, you want to register that event as a conversion event on the Facebook platform. You do not want the pixel to fire if it is the wrong person that is not the right type of lead for you. So what does that mean? Basically, for right now on the Facebook advertising platform, there's 40 to 50,000 data points per every single user that predicts your buying behavior. When you're setting up a Facebook advertising campaign, they all are trained based on a specific machine learning algorithm. And what you'll find is that Facebook is always trying to default to the cheapest lead, not necessarily the right type of lead. Not all leads are created equally. So what you do is when you specify who your ICP is and you tell Facebook that this was not the right type of lead, it starts to optimize towards the right type of lead and not just any lead whatsoever. So what we noticed is that there was a rise in our CPM. In other words, we were targeting a more affluent subset of the real estate agent marketplace, but we were able to charge significantly much higher. In this instance, for the dating industry, we were actually targeting earners that were generating more than $100,000 per year in income. So we didn't want to attract the people that were really struggling with women and having them fill out the form, because that's going to create a lot of interest. So basically, when you're having this type of pixel training and pixel optimization in your business, it creates a floor in terms of lead quality. So I know that somebody can't book a sales call and that the Facebook pixel and the targeting is not prioritizing anybody that is making less than that amount of money. By having these specific questions on your landing page, you're telling Facebook what is a good lead. Versus when I see most of the funnels and most of the people that I look into their business, what I commonly find is that they are not giving Facebook any real data. They're not scoring the leads. They're just allowing everybody to pass through, and the pixel is becoming less sophisticated, less intelligent, and less distinguishing between what is their ideal client profile. As I mentioned before, so after people were sent to that landing page, they were asked their annual income. More than $100,000 per year in income was able to book a call. Less than that was sent to a low ticket funnel where we tried to recoup some of our advertising spend. As I mentioned, over 70% of that ad spend was liquidated, was paid back immediately. A lot of those actually ascended into our higher ticket buyers, and then 4 or 5 of the higher ticket buyers came in and also made an additional purchase. And the benefit of also this new high ticket model is that the sales team actually doubled their earnings per call. Prior to us working together, they were averaging about an $1,100 average cash collected. That jumped up to about $2,400, $2,500, and $4,500 was their average package value in terms of revenue. So typically you're going to find that it is much easier to retain and ascend high quality sales talent when you're operating in a high ticket business model. Typically top sales talent is not really interested in trying to call low ticket buyer leads and upsell them into kind of a very small upgrade in their overall package. There's a bit of an issue with low ticket, which in some instances it's amazing and you get paid for a lead. In a lot of instances, it actually attracts a less affluent demographic. Does that make sense? The optimization process for the high ticket call funnel was specifically designed to get the most affluent people that we could on the phone. Versus the low ticket, there's this bit of a self-selection effect that occurs when you're offering these $47, $97 courses. In some instances, not always, but in some instances, it could attract a less sophisticated, less affluent buying demographic rather. So that being said, that's pretty much everything that we did. If I had to summarize it, it was a change to the model, really getting clear on, are we in the mid-ticket business and want to be really sophisticated in our presentation types of funnel? Are we in the high-ticket business where we feel really confident in our ability to retain, attract, recruit high-quality sales talent? Or are we in the low-ticket business where we feel that we can do an incredible job of liquidating our ad spend, recouping a quick initial sale, and then also upselling those purchasers into a higher ticket offering where we can start to make a serious profit? Getting very clear on that if you're a business owner is super important, and that was the first change that we implemented. The second was in the ad account, switching from an ABO to a CBO style of campaign structure. We improved our messaging, and then the last tweak that I think was really important was getting super clear on who our ICP was and ensuring that our pixel was being trained to attract that type of buyer. That's pretty much all that I have for you guys today. If you are in the high ticket business or in the service-based business and you're interested in having an outside opinion on how we would potentially help you grow your business, fill out your information below if you're interested in us running your ads. Also have a mentorship program if you're not qualified to be a client for our agency, if you're doing less than kind of $50,000 to $100,000 per month in revenue. So regardless, fill out your information below. Myself or my sales team will reach out if I think it's a fit. Hope this was helpful for you guys today, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.